Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast that celebrates trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstis, and I'd like to start with a big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support The Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. I'm delighted to say that this, the 13th season of the podcast, is a serialisation of my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. Chapter 14, Just Add Sequins. Sportswomen must be physically and mentally strong, yet also portray an image of vulnerability to be perceived as feminine. It is a setup. Upon achieving a feminine appearance, women in sport are then sexualised, trivialised and devalued. Vicky Crane. We can be athletic and feminine, but do we want to? 2012. I have a vivid memory of coming home in tears, aged about 14, after a local boy had teased me, saying perhaps I was really a man because I'd just won the Middlesex County shot put competition. It was something I had been proud of at the time, and his comments, made in front of my friends, had left me embarrassed and sad. Seeing me in tears, my older brother Tim suggested next time I respond by asking the boy what he had ever got a county medal for. Perhaps wanking? It made me laugh at the time, shocked at the rudeness of Tim's suggestion, but also wishing I could have made such a quick retort when the boy had mocked me. Jump forward to my being a mother of teenage girls, and it really saddened me that 30 years later, they, and their friends too, were called Butch and Dyke at school because they took part in competitive sport. What those comments reflect, along with the vitriol that sportswomen have to endure each day on social media, is a historical, cultural belief that sport is inherently mannish and masculine, and that women who want to play and excel at sport are therefore less feminine. As I explained in my opening chapter, much of what women in sport still experience today stems from Victorian pseudoscience and the assumption that physical exertion would damage women's bodies and their ability to reproduce. This is magnified by traditional views of femininity that persist in society, depicting women as soft, gentle, delicate, weak, fragile and elegant. Sport, on the other hand, requires us to be strong, powerful, aggressive, bold and skilled, traits more typically associated with men. Many people, primarily men, also feel uncomfortable about women taking part in physical contact sport because it challenges societal norms of what is appropriate behaviour for each gender. The depressing thing is that this means many girls and young women stop playing sport because they worry it will make them look what society still tells them is unfeminine. Girls feel forced to choose between being either sporty or feminine. We live in a world where girls are still brought up to believe they need to look a certain way to attract men. Boys can roll out of bed and head to school with barely a comb through their hair, but for many teenage girls and young women, there is still a huge pressure to look good. Hair, makeup, clothes and body shape are the focus of their attention. This can mean that all the joys of wonderful, sweaty, competitive sport are rejected as a result of the pressures of physical appearance. Things are changing in this space, which is positive news. In the last decade, we have seen a significant shift in women's attitudes to strength and power, which are now viewed as qualities to be admired, with fewer girls wanting to be seen as frail and weak. Women's bodies are being celebrated for what they can do rather than how they look, with campaigns such as Strong is the New Skinny and movements like Girls Gone Strong. Increased media coverage of female athletes and sporting role models can also have a significant impact. The more we can see and celebrate extraordinary sportswomen, The more we can normalise women playing and excelling at sport, being strong and powerful, having muscles, showing exertion and looking sweaty, the better. It is sometimes a tricky path for women's sport. Some, a minority, feel that we need to feminise sport itself to make it more appealing to young girls. There was much uproar in 2016 when the FA revealed its innovative ideas for attracting more girls into football, which included pink whistles, nice-smelling bibs, clothes vouchers, and allowing girls breaks to stop and check their phones. Some young female football players let the FA know what they thought about the approach. We aren't all brainless Barbie dolls. I remember a similar campaign for girls' sport a few years ago in which the then CEOs of Sport England and the charity Women in Sport talked about changing the emphasis for girls in schools to focus more on dance and Zumba, think sequins and swooshing, rather than girls needing to run around and get sweaty. In 2014, an understandable outcry followed after the Sports and Equalities Minister, Helen Grant, addressed women who might find traditional sports and sweating unfeminine. You don't have to feel unfeminine, she declared. There are some wonderful sports which you can do and perform to a very high level, and I think those participating look absolutely radiant and very feminine, such as ballet, gymnastics, cheerleading, and even roller skating. I feel passionately that it should not be about changing sport to make it more feminine, but society changing its views of what's appropriate for women and girls. There's a paragraph in Anna Kessel's magnificent book, Eat, Sweat, Play, that completely resonated with me when I read it. Society's stereotypes tell us that women don't like sport, but when we really think about it, that doesn't make any sense. Isn't the fundamental principle of being physically active something that comes naturally to us from the moment we start to walk? Don't we all remember our childhoods, running down a hill so fast it made us laugh until we couldn't breathe, daring ourselves to climb a tree, to do our first cartwheel, our first handstand? What happened to us? When did we change? When did we lose our sense of fun, our sense of play? Sport is just playing, after all. Anna's so right. Sport, in its simplest format, is about moving our bodies to play games. It's natural. It's fun. It's inclusive and exciting. At what point in her upbringing does a young girl who loves splashing in the pool with her brother, kicking footballs or riding a bike, begin to sense that all the fun and exhilaration to be found in playing sport isn't for her? At what point are we telling our young women that it is no longer appropriate for them to be scruffy and sweaty and muddy like the boys? I grew up with 3 brothers, one of whom was my twin. I don't ever remember being told I couldn't take part in any of the sports they did. My twin and I learned to swim at the same time, and I joined the athletics club with my older brother Tim. But I wasn't typical of the girls in my school because I love sports so much. I went to an all-girls school in the 1980s. The fact that I wanted to compete in athletics was something slightly alien in a school where it was more about netball, hockey or tennis. I was the only girl from my school who came in with wet hair after early morning swimming sessions in the pool or went off to compete in athletics competitions at weekends. What does it mean to be feminine today? Are female athletes finally able to be both sporty and feminine? Professor Mary Jo Kane, founder of the Tucker Centre for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, says that when it comes to female athletes being represented historically in the media, they are much more likely to be presented off the court, out of uniform in sexy poses, which gives the message to society and to female athletes themselves that they are primarily considered in terms of how pretty and sexy they are, rather than their athletic ability. Professor Kane says this matters a great deal because when young women see sexualized images of athletes, It tells them their bodies are just there to be consumed. Coverage like this also implies that women do not possess the same physiological attributes as male athletes. Women are not seen as strong, powerful, and competent. It makes men appear superior in sport and, by implication, superior in other aspects of life. Changing how we see female athletes can change how we see females in general. Sex sells sex. Sex doesn't sell women's sport is the clear finding from many research studies talking to fans of all ages, along with female sports participants. When shown a range of images of women in sports kit, in action, and on court, through to leisure shots and then in sexy poses, it's the images of women actually playing their sport that all audiences found aspirational and most likely to encourage them to watch women's sport and recognise the competence of players. The only grouping to prefer the shots of women in fewer clothes were younger men. But even they agreed it did not make them more likely to follow women's sport. They just thought the women looked sexy. These findings were reinforced in 2021 by research from 2 Circles and the Women's Sport Trust, which showed that images of female athletes in action were 12% more likely to prompt viewers to find out more about the specific sport than images of those athletes in personal or entertainment settings. Some people may believe that female athletes looking attractive and sexy in the media will help increase the profile of sport and potentially encourage more participation. Research, however, would suggest that Olympic gold cyclist Victoria Pendleton loses her lycra in revealing photo shoot, a genuine headline from the Daily Mail in 2009, did little to establish the credibility of elite female cyclists in the minds of its readers. From 2002 to 2007, the Ladies Professional Golf Association attempted to increase the marketability of its players with a programme called the 5 Points of Celebrity. A players' summit included compulsory training on the elements of this plan, namely performance, approachability, passion and joy, relevance, and appearance. While players recognised the need to raise consumer awareness of the women's game and their potential earning capacity, many were disappointed that appearance was such a focus of the plan, with the pressure for them to embody femininity. I have always felt uncomfortable with the tabloid media's desire to dress elite sportswomen up in glamorous clothing to show the other side of their lives. As if looking amazing in their sports kit is not enough of a reason to give them coverage in a newspaper. I remember a particular shoot the Daily Mail did with the GB hockey team after they'd won gold in Rio in 2016, and the women were all in high heels and sequined evening gowns. And the gold for glamour goes to our hockey girls. Team GB heroines swap their shin pads for sequins as they reveal all about their Rio medal joy, the headline read. I was so disappointed to see it at the time. It felt belittling and demeaning to these extraordinary athletes. I am sure the GB Hockey communications team were delighted with the mainstream coverage, the Daily Mail again, but I always wondered how the players themselves felt about it. All that said, even on court, you could say that the GB hockey women are still conforming to traditional gender stereotypes by playing in dresses. It's the same for netball. Female athletes do not choose to train every day in dresses or skirts, preferring more practical leggings or shorts. But when it comes to competition, the rules dictate they must wear dresses. Why? In 2019, I had planned an April Fool's campaign for a client, a rugby club playing in the Premier 15s. The April Fool's hook was that we would be revealing that from next season, the female rugby players would play in skirts. The press release we had drafted declared that in order to attract more women into the sport, the club was backing the idea that women would now play rugby in skirts. I had even included a comment that the club was taking its lead from the International Boxing Association, who, ahead of 2012, had recommended that female boxers wear skirts to differentiate themselves from the men. This bit about boxing was actually true, although thankfully the women rebelled and the ruling was overturned. For various reasons, we didn't go ahead with the April Fool, but for me, the fact that it sounded so ridiculous to suggest that these fabulous, powerful, strong female rugby players would really want to play in something as impractical as a skirt spoke volumes. Perhaps things will change sooner than we think when it comes to women playing sport in dresses. In December 2020, Netball Australia's State of the Game report highlighted that young girls and women are turning their backs on the sport because of the nature of the uniforms. It's an urgent area to address, according to Megan Morris in The Guardian. The report canvassed opinions from across the netball community, from grassroots to elite players, and the issue of uniforms was one that echoed strongly throughout all levels of the game. Netball has still not confronted the female athlete paradox, where the traditionally masculine traits of strength and aggression, which are required in sport, must be balanced by femininity in appearance. This is where the dresses come in. There is an idea that the audience can feel comfortable in seeing players clash in the air, fight for the ball, and be taken from the court with blood streaming from their faces, as long as they do so while dressed appropriately for their gender. This need to have women in sport wearing feminine clothing dates back to the 1800s, when it was a huge obstacle for women wanting to be more physically active. Restrictive corsets made it almost impossible for women to fill their lungs properly, while society considered it indecent for women to show as much as an ankle, not exactly outfits that would allow women to move freely. In the 1890s, women wanting to take up the popular new hobby of riding a bike and enjoy all the freedom that this provided were hampered by the need to look ladylike at all times. As a letter to the US agricultural magazine The Country Gentleman questioned, what on earth the common or garden lady bicyclist wants with knickerbockers and other strange garments in the street, I cannot think. No wonder the rude man in the street jeers after them. I am only saying this for your own good, dear ladies. I am too great an admirer of yours to allow you to continue your rational dress without a word of protest. Wear your knickerbockers by all means, but let them be concealed by a skirt. Putting women in feminine clothes to attract crowds wasn't an April Fool for women's baseball in the 1950s, when chewing gum magnate Philip K. Wrigley, the owner of the Chicago Cubs Major League franchise, drove the development of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, along with advertising executive Arthur Meyerhoff. Wrigley said he was personally repelled by the pants-wearing, tough-talking female softballer and devised an approach that he thought would attract sponsors and spectators. He and Meyerhoff moved the sport away from softball to become baseball for women, but using what they termed the femininity principle to ensure the league was committed to preserving feminine ideals. Even the names of the teams reflected the drive for femininity: the Daisies, Lasses, Peaches and Bells. The women, who were chosen for their attractiveness along with their physical skills, wore makeup and short skirts. They commented on the pain of sliding into the bases without the protection of the long trousers worn by men. They received lessons on graceful social deportment, and players were reminded that boyish bobs and other imitations of masculine style and habit were taboo. They were never allowed to appear in public in shorts or trousers. No women of colour were ever recruited. The success of the league in the 1950s saw the 120-game schedule attract between 500,000 and 1 million spectators. But the league declined at the end of a decade, in part because society began to reject gender distinctions. The story of women's baseball is a complex one. While it was positive news that highly skilled, talented female athletes could be paid to play sport just like the men, it also reinforced stereotypical views that women should always remain feminine in sport. I am concerned that this attitude is still apparent in some sports today, among certain sports administrators who try desperately to make women's sport appear more feminine and traditionally heterosexual, which in turn can alienate women and girls who do not identify with traditional depictions of what it is to be female. In 2011, the Badminton World Federation stated that all female players must wear skirts on the court to ensure attractive representation of badminton. Players and fans were not happy. Unfortunately, the rule was quickly overturned, despite the then Deputy President explaining, "We just want them to look feminine and have a nice presentation so women will be more popular." Another example, closer to home, was England Netball's Netball Nails campaign in 2013, described as part of a campaign to help raise awareness of netball, as well as illustrating that competitive sport doesn't have to be ugly and macho. You can still be beautiful, feminine and glamorous, both on and off the pitch. In the US, another sport that struggled with a reputation of being too masculine and not suitable for feminine athletes in the 1900s was track and field athletics. Few white women chose to compete for this reason, and it was African American women who ignored public perception and stepped into the light to lead the way in track and field with huge international success. Their legacy continues to this day. A little unbelievably, such was the negativity towards women competing in athletics that in the 1950s the Olympic governing bodies seriously considered eliminating several track and field events from the Games because they were not truly feminine. IOC member Prince Franz Joseph of Liechtenstein even commented that reducing the number of women's athletic events would not only help solve the problem of Olympic overexpansion, but we would be spared the unaesthetic spectacle of women trying to look and act like men. As women's sport grew in prominence and popularity through the 1950s, it was still very much impacted by beliefs about women's weak bodies and perceptions of femininity from earlier in the century, coupled with society's growing homophobia. As the male-dominated sports press continued to develop, male journalists celebrated the female athletes who subscribed to their feminine ideals, dressing in fashionable clothes and demonstrating grace and elegance in their play. Over 100 years later, as I was growing up and watching Wimbledon with my mum in the 1970s, I can remember the antagonistic comments the media made about Martina Navratilova competing in shorts versus Chrissy Evert in her frilly knickers and floaty dresses. Tennis at that time highlighted the conflict of athleticism versus more traditional views of femininity, with Chris Evert earning more in sponsorship despite Navratilova winning more tournaments overall. Along with being judged for their appearance, female tennis players were also criticised for their sexuality. Here's what the Sunday Express reported in 1978. When Martina Navratilova plays at Wimbledon this week, the eye of every healthy, lusty male will be on her. She personifies the essence of attractive femininity. Disillusioning, isn't it, to learn that she is shacked up in the United States with the country's most aggressive lesbian. I sigh with nostalgia for the days when at tournaments like Wimbledon, the greatest danger to the chastity of young lady tennis stars came from the randy males. Devastating, isn't it, to learn that nowadays their greatest peril would seem to come from other lasses in frilly panties. I love that Martina's response was to snub the media comments by appearing even more traditionally masculine, wearing shorts and tops that emphasised her wonderful, strong body. Sadly, the physical appearance and attire of female tennis players can still be an issue today. It was only in 2017 that the WTA itself courted controversy when they asked fans to vote in an online poll to choose the female player they felt was best dressed at Wimbledon that year. By focusing on their appearance, the implication was that this mattered more than the player's talent and athleticism. Similarly, it is hard to forget that horrible moment when a male TV presenter asked the world number 7, Eugenie Bouchard, to give us a twirl following a convincing 6-0, 6-3 victory at the Australian Open. Rather than ask her about the win, Ian Cohen from Channel 7 asked whether Bouchard would tell us about her outfit. A twirl? The 20-year-old Canadian asked with disbelief, to which Cohen explained, a twirl, like a pirouette. Attitudes are slowly changing, but as Jamie Schultz explains in Women's Sports, there are still certain sports that we think of as feminine and gender appropriate. These tend to be individual sports that involve little physical contact between competitors, while emphasising grace, beauty and artistic expression. It has therefore been less controversial for women to participate in sports such as tennis, gymnastics and figure skating. Of course, another factor that may drive female athletes to emphasise their femininity is that conventionally attractive sportswomen have generally received more media attention and larger endorsement deals. In what is sometimes referred to as the Kornikova syndrome, the Russian-born player enjoyed unprecedented profile and sponsorship during her career, despite never winning a major singles tournament. The depressing title of a cover story in Sports Illustrated in 2000 read, "She won't win the French Open, but who cares?" Anna Kournikova is living proof that even in this age of supposed enlightenment, a hot body can count as much as a good backhand. Another unsettling trend in the sporting space is leading sportswear brands choosing to use models and celebrities to promote their products rather than female athletes. In 2016, US Olympic ice dancer Meryl David shared 3 photos on Twitter of Bella Hadid wearing Nike, Kylie Jenner wearing Puma, and Ali Raisman, the Olympic gymnast, wearing Reebok. Her hugely supported tweet read, "I'll take the one promoted by the athlete, please." Many might say that, as she had over 14 million followers on Instagram at the time, it is perhaps clear why Nike chose Bella Hadid. The trend began back in 2014 when supermodel Gisele Bündchen was named as the first non-athlete to be the face of Under Armour. Despite the negative public response to this move, other sportswear brands soon followed suit, with Reebok choosing Gigi Hadid, Adidas working with Kendall Jenner and Karlie Kloss, and Cara Delevingne being a Puma ambassador since 2016. In August 2020, sportswear company Canterbury of New Zealand made a massive faux pas in this area. In launching a new Ireland rugby shirt, the sponsor used female models rather than members of the women's rugby squad. The image showed 3 airbrushed women wearing long dark trousers rather than shorts, alongside 3 male members of the Irish men's squad. Florence Williams, a Wasps player, took to Twitter to show her annoyance. Spot the difference. 2 jersey launches, 3 models, 3 international players, 3 profiles lifted, 1 huge opportunity missed. By not using the female players to market their own kit, an opportunity to build recognition, fan bases, and creating role models for future generations is lost. Trying to explain the decision, a helpful man on Twitter suggested that Canterbury had chosen the models as they looked more feminine than female rugby players. What followed was wonderful to witness as my Twitter feed became flooded With hundreds of rugby-playing women calling out Canterbury and those comments and sharing images of them playing under the hashtag #IamEnough. The impact was fantastic and, to give them credit, Canterbury immediately contacted Williams, backed the hashtag #IamEnough campaign and pledged to use real rugby players in all future kit launches. They also issued an apology for getting it so wrong. Talking to the Telegraph Women's Sport afterwards, Williams said, "I'm sick of female athletes having to be constantly grateful. Yes, I'm grateful for the progress, but we're not at the destination yet." What I most admired about this rapid response was that the women in sport, and male allies, saw their collective voices having immediate, significant impact. We are over 50% of the population, after all. Just think how effective we could be if we worked together more frequently to call out the brands and sports bodies in this way. A disturbing move onwards from the consideration of what constitutes appealing and feminine for female athletes is the notion of sex appeal. You just have to consider the variance in male and female uniforms in some sports to witness this. Male athletes wear clothes designed for comfort while completing their activity, while female athletes' clothes are often much scantier than required. In elite track and field, women compete in sports bras and short, tight bottoms with their stomachs and thighs on display. The men generally wear thigh-length lycra shorts and vest tops. Why the difference? When considering ways to increase the popularity of women's football in 2004, Sepp Blatter, the former head of FIFA and once one of the most powerful figures in sport, incurred the wrath of many female players when he said, "Let the women play in more feminine clothes like they do in volleyball. They could, for example, have tighter shorts. Female players are pretty, if you excuse me for saying so." Until 2012, the female beach volleyball players to which Sepp Blatter referred were required to wear bikinis, the bottoms of which could be no more than 6 centimetres wide on the hip, while the men played in baggy shorts and vest tops. Not only did this clearly sexualise the sport, but it made women's beach volleyball a bit of a joke, detracting from the fact that it is an incredibly tough sport. At least these rules have now changed, and in Rio, it was wonderful to see Egyptian teammates Nada Mouid and Doa El-Gobashi shun the bikini in favour of long sleeves and long pants. El-Gobashi also covered her hair with a hijab. It does feel that the depiction and narrative around sportswomen is at last beginning to change. Platforms like ESPNW are driving this with their coverage of women's sport, and in 2019, global media coverage of the FIFA Women's World Cup also focused more on the players' skills and abilities than how they looked. The WTA sought to raise the profile of women's tennis recently by showcasing female players on the tour as highly skilled and dedicated elite athletes. Commenting on the Strong is Beautiful campaign, CEO Stacey Alistair said, "The unique combination of athleticism, strength and determination on the court and success, interests and inner beauty off the court is what makes women's tennis so attractive to millions around the world." And what's not to love about the WNBA's campaigns in recent years, Watch Me and Watch Us Work, which highlight how extraordinary the players are in all they do. It would be wonderful to see more sports emulate these in the future. While the primary message in this chapter is that we want to celebrate sportswomen for their accomplishments rather than their appearance, in a fascinating essay, New Rules for New Times, Sportswomen and Media Representation in the Third Wave, Tony Bruce asks if female athletes can be both pretty and powerful. Decades of research on the media representation of sportswomen, some of which I've mentioned, reinforces the polarised debate about whether women should pose for lifestyle or sexy photo shoots, or if this detracts from their status as elite athletes. The mismatch between femininity and athleticism has been well rehearsed in the literature since the attributes associated with sport, physical strength, mental toughness, speed, and muscle, are also signifiers of masculinity, so much so that the concept of the female athlete can itself be viewed as an oxymoron. This is changing, however, and just as many modern-day feminists are happy to embrace and celebrate their femininity, so we've seen the rise of feisty and feminine female heroes who happily kick ass and look gorgeous at the same time. From movie stars Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman and Black Widow, through to Daenerys Targaryen, Arya Stark and Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones, what's not to love about these magnificent, powerful women? As Tony points out, across a wide range of cultural sites, images of masculinity and femininity are now combined and recombined in different configurations that challenge traditional notions of gender difference. And so we see sportswomen declaring that they don't feel objectified in photo shoots, but enjoy the opportunity to showcase and celebrate their fit, healthy, beautiful bodies. Perhaps it's no longer acceptable for society to dictate that sportswomen shouldn't combine their sport and athleticism with being sexy and attractive. As Tony Bruce concludes, in identifying the similarities between the rise in cultural visibility of strong, tough, and beautiful female movie heroes and strong, tough, and beautiful athletes, I suggest we are seeing the emergence of a potentially new form of femininity that refuses to cede physical strength and sporting excellence to men, and thus represents an important rupture in the articulation of sport and masculinity. Thank you so much for listening to the serialisation of my book Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. If you'd like a copy, it's available in hardback and paperback in all good bookshops and online. The Game Changers podcast is free to listen to on all podcast platforms. Head over to fearlesswomen.co.uk to find out more about all of the incredible game changers I've spoken to in previous series. There are over 100 of them, including elite athletes, journalists, coaches, scientists, broadcasters and CEOs. As well as listening to all the episodes on the website, you can find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive network for all women working in sport. And you can register for the Fearless Women newsletter, a weekly review of the global developments in women's sport. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter at Sue Anstis. Finally, if you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd be so grateful if you could do two things. Firstly, if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it. And secondly, if there's anyone in your life, at home or at work, who you think might enjoy the podcast, please do let them know about it and help us spread the word about women's sport and the stories of these incredible game changers.